Hello, welcome to another edition of the Pace Report. I'm Brian Pace. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe my videos both on YouTube and Vimeo, and also visit my website, thepacereport.com, for my weekly column as well as my past segments. As you know, here on the Pace Report, one of my big missions is to sit down with the elder statesmen of the music industry to reflect on their career, but also shed light on, one, how they develop their style and technique, what possesses them to write and how they compose, and also what music does to them mentally and spiritually. And tonight here on the Pace Report, I had the honor and privilege of sitting down with the legendary Lee Ritenour as he played two incredible sold-out nights here at the Iridium here in New York City. Now, Lee has played on some over 3,000 recordings, backing the likes of Barry White, Quincy Jones, as well as Pink Floyd, George Benson, just to name the endless few. But what's made him very unique is that he's been able to adapt and play all musical genres, whether it's pop, jazz, blues, you name it. Mr. Ritenour has played and backed with some of the most iconic musicians in the game. Tonight I had a chance to sit down and talk about his new venture, which is his master classes. In fact, he has a new class called the Musician's Creative Lab, which are 12 creative lessons in which he goes in depth on composing, developing your style, and also playing. Also, I had a chance to sit down and break bread with him about how he's reached this point in his life where he's now giving back in the teaching part, as well as sit down and reflect on two iconic musicians that really changed the game of music, one being the great Dick Dale, as well as the legendary Hal Blaine, who was part of the famous Wrecking Crew. So sit back, relax, and enjoy highlights of Mr. Lee Ritenour performing live at the Iridium here on the Pace Report here in New York City. back to New York.
Glad to be here.
You know, Lee, a lot has happened in the last 6 or 7 years since we last spoke. You have the theory competition going, and also you are now involved with the Musicians Creativity Lab.
That's right.
Explain the process of this new online approach to your master classes.
Well, you know, I've been kind of a mentor and a teacher for a lot of people for a long time, and I've never had a chance since I've had a really busy career to teach too much privately. I really haven't done it for almost ever, you know, but I taught at USC a little bit, and I did master classes for Yamaha and for once in a while for Berklee College of Music, and you know, different organizations where a number of people would come. But then as the online thing has developed and the internet and everyone's on the internet, you know, companies approached me about doing an educational series, and I did one finally for Yamaha, and it's just really coming out now. It is available as of now, but there's going to be more of a push to get it in different parts of the world. Right now it's easily available in Japan, and because it's online you can kind of pull it out of anywhere, but people in the US will be seeing it soon, and I'll have it on my website, and it's easy to go up there and tap on the link, and then it shows you everything. And it's 12 lessons, and it really just kind of covers a lifetime of stuff for me. You know, I picked 12 subjects, not all technical, how to play the guitar kind of stuff, but also just musical subjects about composing, or arranging, being in a band, playing with other people, being an accompanist, being a lead player, what kind of style you're attracted to, how you get your own style, because in today's world there's so many musicians out there that are equal in all parts of the world. You know, there's great players in Eastern Europe and in Asia and South America and North America and Europe, Western Europe. They're all over the place. I see them when I travel. And so it's really important if you're a musician, especially when you be a professional musician and do it, to have your own individual voice. So not that you just sound like yourself, but you're actually making kind of a statement, which means could be through your compositions, through the kind of music you like, through the kind of music you project, through the way you play your instrument, the way you sing, the way you play, all that kind of stuff.
You know, Lee, I think it's kind of effective because you've had some very proficient, if not iconic, guitar players teach you. You had Joe Pass, you had Barney Kessel, you had Tony Tedesco. I mean, it seems like coming from this part of your life, this is a necessity now to groom this next generation of musicians.
Absolutely. And you know, with our six-string theory competition that started in 2010 because of that record that I did that had all those legendary guitar players on it, and then we encouraged a new guitarist to come. We had a contest that Yamaha and Berklee sponsored, and we started in 2010 by discovering a new talent to join us on the record. After that, it has evolved, and now guitarists from around the world in jazz, rock, blues, classical, acoustic, and rhythm join the competition in one of those categories. And then we've added piano, bass, and drums, so we have kind of the whole band, rhythm band now. And we had visits from 190 countries, which is just about every country in the world now, in the last couple of years, and coming up to the site sixstringtheory.com. And then we had 60 countries join. So it's a joy for me to watch, you know, guitarists and pianists and bass players and drummers doing their thing from England to America to Japan to Brazil to Saudi Arabia to, you know, Eastern Europe. And, you know, the bass player that's playing with me tonight here in New York is from Serbia, and the pianist that won in 2014 is playing with me tonight. He's from Tbilisi, Georgia. So wow. So my drummer, of course, is my son Wes, and he's half Brazilian, and I'm just from LA. So
you know, Lee, your approach to music now, as far as writing and producing, how is it now with the whole digital advent? I know it's a lot easier now, but do you think that you as a musician are more proficient as a, because you now have to wear many shoes now, because you have your own studio. You have to be the engineer, you have to know the equipment, and you also have to do the behind the scenes, produce and play.
Right. Well, I first put my studio together in 1984. So I've had a home studio since the early 80s, and then of course, everybody's on the computer using Pro Tools or Logic or some other software, and I've been that way ever since the 80s, when sort of you could first do your own demos by playing all the instruments and playing a bass part and playing a keyboard part and programming a drum part. I remember in 1984 when I first had my real professional home studio, I was programming some stuff for the Harlequin album that I did with Dave Grusin, and I was just having so much fun, because you could hear your own vision, kind of like with this little blueprint of the band playing, and how it was going to sound. So that would make it easier when I would go to the studio, play the guys the demo, and then say, and I didn't want to stay with just the programming. I still using live musicians as I always have, but once in a while, as the stuff sophisticated and my programming got more sophisticated, I started using some programmed instruments within the tracks. But I'm always a big believer that you can't beat the real people, and it's so much fun to play with other musicians. I always encourage that, and I still, even though programming has gone so far, and some people are so adept at it, and of course it's a more affordable way to do a record. If you can't hire 6-7 guys to back you up, you can push a button and make it happen. I understand that.
saddened. I heard about the fire, and you had over 100 guitars. How are you and your wife holding up after this?
Well, we're fine. It was definitely a shock. I had it's a peculiar story because for years I had this house that I bought as a studio musician when I was 27. I bought a house in Malibu. It was a good investment I did back then, and then we rebuilt it with a beautiful house in the 90s, and an incredible architect, and one of those really amazing homes. And we lived there, but all along I had my studio in the city, and I kind of liked being in the city with the music stuff because all the musicians were closer to come there, and it gave me a place to go write and rehearse and record. But then finally I decided to move the studio back out to Malibu, and so I built a great studio and moved everything there, and about 10 months later the fire came through, and I had about 100 guitars there and got out with 6, and then all the music that I had since the time I was 10 years old was out there, so that was a loss. And I had about 25 amps; those were all gone. But a lot of people have been very helpful for me to put it back together, and we'll rebuild and build a beautiful house.
Now you've escaped a couple of fires, a couple of times, right?
Well, nothing like this. I didn't lose anything before, but Southern California, it's rough out there, and especially you live near the canyons. Almost everybody is susceptible because, it's a very there's obviously a lot of sunshine out there, so it's a great place to live and everything. But the drought has been serious these years, and everything was very dry. And when the fire came through the canyon that day, there was nobody to stop it. The fire department was spread out. All the fire departments were spread out, throughout all the canyons that were on fire. And by the time I got to the coast, to the beach, there was nobody there. They were just like, it is what it is, So, but it's back east you got other kind of problems, and down in the south of the U.S. you got different, So everyone gets tested.
Going back to the education component, you, for the last 20, 25 years, you've been a stickler about emphasizing to learn classical composition. And as a musician, what does classical music do for you as a composer, as well as what it does to you as far as develop your technique?
Well, most of the musicians out there that are coming up are not classical musicians, and I've never called myself a classical musician, but I did study a lot of classical guitar and went to USC and studied with great Christopher Parkening, one of the foremost players and teachers in the field, and he's over at Pepperdine now these days. But then I studied, I think that for me personally, the biggest influence of classical music was not writing classical music, because I never really, I wrote a tiny bit, but not very much. But the biggest thing that helped was that, the world has known these great classical composers for hundreds of years, and their material is out there to be studied. And so in high school, I took a class at a junior college, and the college was called El Camino, and the teacher was named Wally Bauer, and this guy was this brilliant teacher that he was famous in the Southern California at that time, and he was kind of a little nutty guy with this big personality, and he took me through these books and helped me analyze what Ravel, what Debussy, what Mozart, what Beethoven, what all these, why he went from this chord to that chord, why he connected these melodic dots, why he repeated certain patterns, and we would analyze Ravel or Debussy, and he would see how the guy went from here to here to here. He says that's a compositional tool. And so I didn't remember everything he taught me, but I grabbed onto a lot of things that helped in my jazz and pop compositions.
The thing that really was your amazing grace and Chuck in the 70s and 80s as a session musician, you played a myriad of everything. You played music scores, you played jazz, you played rock, you played R&B. What is it that you want these next musicians, especially when they're coming to your master classes online, what is it that you want them to walk away with to become a more proficient musician like yourself?
Well, I think to study the guitar and really know the guitar and to get into the depth of harmony and theory and everything is very important. I think it's much more important to work with a teacher and if you can afford to hire a teacher, a private teacher, and or take classes, go to college, music classes, and at least if not do it online. Fortunately today, if you can't afford to go to let's say you live in a small town and you can't be in New York or LA or or North Texas or in Miami and go to one of these schools that has incredible music departments. Fortunately, the U.S. has incredible schools all over the place, but even, as we all know, paying for college tuition and stuff is no joke these days. But there is a lot of this material available online. So, if I was that age where I was young, I would be eating up the internet. But there's more to learning music than just copying YouTube and watching people, because what the YouTube and similar type videos do, they encourage copying, like do it like this. And one thing I'll tell the people who are watching that are interested in learning an instrument, I had an incredible teacher when I was a kid, from the time I was 12 all the way through my teens, and we were friends until he passed away. And he would never pick up a guitar when I was in a room, including when I was 12 years old. And people would ask me, so how's your teacher? His name was Duke Miller. How's your teacher, Duke, Lee? And is he a good player? And I said, well, I don't know. He never plays in front of me. Well, what do you mean he never plays? He said, well, how does he teach you? He says, well, he talks to me. He says he has me do it. He explains everything and has me do it. Once in a blue moon, he would pick up a guitar and show me something. But in today's world, because of YouTube and this different system, people, show some flashy thing and then people watch it on YouTube and slow it down and copy it. That discourages people from learning the depth of what they really need to know. Like my teacher taught me how to write I wrote my own chord book. I didn't buy a book. He had me write my own chord book. It took me about 6 months. So he taught me that a triad has a root and a third and a fifth, right? And so then he said, okay, with a C chord, you got C, E, and G, right? So he had me go home and scribble out on the music score and in those guitar-type boxes that we use. He said, write every C chord you can on the whole guitar. Go from here to here. And so I wrote every C chord that I could find on the guitar. And then I went back to him. He said, that's good, that's good. Oh, what about this one? You missed that one, and you missed that one, and you missed that one. And of course, I was 13 years old then. And so then he had me do it in every key. Then he had me do major, minor. Then we got to the 7ths, and we got to the 9ths, and the 11ths, and the 13ths, and then the flat 5s, and the sharp 5s, and flat 9s. And by the time that the summer was done, I had a book like that. And by me writing my own chord book from the beginning of the guitar scale all the way, the neck, all the way up to the top, I got to know the guitar. So, so if I go down the scale here, I can harmonize anything I want, just because I know the neck so well, and I know what chords to play. I didn't learn it out of a book. I wrote the book. So in today's world, people don't do that as much. And why that's important to try to get to that depth, because it helps you get your own style as a musician. And it's very important to have your own style. It's so important, especially in today's world, because, if you think there was a lot of guitar players in my time coming up, it's times 50 now. It's like in L.A., when I was growing up, maybe there was, 25 good guitar players my age coming up that I knew about and that I was competing against. Now that same age group has 2,500, other guitar players competing for the same gig.
And don't forget the internet. It's worldwide now.
Yeah, and now it's worldwide. You're exactly right. It's like, now you're only competing about what's in your neighborhood. You're competing against, who's in Berlin and who's in London and who's in Tokyo. Yeah, it's crazy.
We've lost two very important musicians who were very, very connected to your world musically. The first one was Dick Dale, because he was such an iconic innovator. Tell the world, or tell my viewers out here, what Dick did as far as his musicality and the technique he brought to rock music and to the guitar.
Well, it's funny. I was growing up in the 60s, right? And so I started playing the guitar in 1960. So that was and I was in Los Angeles. So rock was just coming into its own. The 50s rock was there, and it was continuing. But then soon, in the early 60s, the real rock guitar was coming, and guys like Hendrix and Jeff Beck and Clapton and just a multitude of amazing guitar players were coming. And then there was the country players out of Nashville, and there was famous people like Chet Atkins around. And so somebody like Dick Dale, he created in Southern California the surf music, and a lot of people would kind of make fun of some of the stuff he did, but he was coming up with tones on his guitar and starting to use effects. The Ventures, a group called the Ventures, and Dick Dale were the first ones to use what we call the fuzz tone, right, and put distortion on the guitar. Later, Hendrix would make a career out of it. But, the Ventures, even a little more than Dick Dale, was starting to use distortion. And I thought that was so cool when I heard that, And then Dick Dale was using delays and reverb, and enhancing the guitar from this sort of dry jazz guitar or country or classical, which was completely straight, and all of a sudden the guitar had all these effects and depth. And so as a 12-year-old at the time, well, an 8-year-old at first, and then 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, I was like, this is too cool, And so I was never quite such a fan of the surf music, but those sounds that were coming out of there was really revolutionary, what he was doing. And he had more of an influence on rock guitar than anybody else sort of really realizes.
Hal Blaine was really, I would say, from 1960, 59 to about 50s, to actually up until he died. This man played on some of the most iconic rhythm and blues, rock, pop records. And you coming out of LA and the whole musicianship thing, you encountered Hal Blaine. Tell me about Hal Blaine.
Well, I was young enough and got in on the session scene when I was the first time I did sessions I was 16, but I got in pretty early at like 19. By the time I was 19, I was doing a few sessions a week, and then I met my buddy Dave Grusin, and he was the movie king at the time. He started hiring me. Once Dave started hiring me, everybody hired me, and by the time I was 21, 22, I was rolling like 15 sessions a week. But that was before my generation. That meant people like Larry Carlton and Jay Graydon and David Foster and David Page, and then Steve Lukather after that, and Ray Parker Jr. and David T. Walker and Wah Wah Watson, all these great guitar players. And I'm leaving Dean Parks, and I could keep going. But before all those guys got rolling, there was the Wrecking Crew. And the Wrecking Crew was composed of Tommy Tedesco and on guitar, and Hal Blaine on drums, and all these Carol Kay, and on bass, and just amazing players. And what was the most important thing about them, what is not reported so often, is that before that, the studio musician was part of the orchestra, part of the big band, came out of a more formal setting. Everyone wore ties and suits, and it came out of almost out of the big band and out of the orchestra. And that's the way the films in Los Angeles were being done, and the TV shows and records. And they're backing up great artists, Nat King Cole and Bing Crosby and Sinatra, and then doing all these movies and stuff. But it was a more formal setting. And then comes the Wrecking Crew and a drummer like Hal Blaine. They take out the ties, and now they're going to do sessions and helping people like the Beach Boys and different things. But they're not just playing on the record, they're helping create the record. And they're adding special parts, they're adding hooks. And that became the word hooks, little parts that sort of would make the track better. Because producers then started hiring the Wrecking Crew to make their magic, to make their tracks sound like magic.
They
because you couldn't write that stuff out on a piece of paper. You couldn't write that out on a score. You had to have people like Tommy Tedesco or Hal Blaine coming up with a special beat, or Carol Kay doing something on the bass, or somebody doing something that would inspire the other guys, that would inspire, and always respecting what the song was, sometimes making the song better, giving the song a hook where it didn't have a hook. And so that now all of a sudden the rock bands like Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and the Beatles and the Stones, the biggest bands in the world, were listening to these records that the Wrecking Crew and other people were starting to work on in New York and L.A. and creating these hooks. And all of a sudden, these guys realized, the Beatles realized, we have to have a hook, not just songwriting-wise. That had been around for forever, but the track had to have hooks. And that's what these other musicians were all about. So when I was coming up as a studio guitar player, and my other guys that were successful, we were successful because we had all the skills. We could play rock, jazz, R&B, pop, all the stuff. But we were also free enough, which became part of the sort of the improvisational spirit of being a musician, to come up with a little idea that on somebody's record would help that record sound better. You know, and Hal was amazing at finding these drum parts, you know, and then so he inspired the next generation of drummers, and Tommy Tedesco and Dennis Budimir and all these guys who inspired the next generation of guitar players, and you know, it helps evolve pop music.
What did Tommy and Hal impart on you as a musician coming up?
Well, it's Tommy Tedesco, which was the sort of the legendary, almost like the mafia king of the guitar players. He would always make fun of us young guys and stuff. And he told Larry Carlton and I, he told both of us, he said, you aren't lifers here. And I said, what do you mean lifers? He said, you're not a lifer studio musician. I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, you're going to have your own career. He says, you're going to be here for a few years, but you're not meant to be doing this for a lifetime. I said, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And he said, in your case, it's a good thing. He said, but, you know, he said, you can do all, you have to be versatile being a studio musician. You have to know how to play rock authentically. You have to be able to play R&B and Motown and funky stuff, and what would be now today the equivalent of maybe making hip-hop records. You have to know the genre. You have to be able to be inside of it, just not on top of it. You can't be faking that stuff. You have to be inside of it for doing it for real. But he says, on the other hand, you have to develop your style. They have to want to call you because you're contributing something that they like the way you do it. So Quincy Jones was the ultimate master of calling the people that would add personality to the records he was producing. So he called me in the early days to play on the Brothers Johnson and on his projects, and George Benson's Give Me the Night and all these albums, and he wanted every studio guy that he called, he wanted them there to add personality and flavor to the record.
You saved George Benson and Quincy on a couple of parts of that Give Me the Night record. And from what I was told, it was about maybe 5 seconds that was accidentally erased, and he called you at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and you had to go in and do this little fill part.
Yeah, that was on was it on Give Me the Night itself, the title track? I think it was. It was definitely on that album, and I had been hired to help George kind of get a little fresher sound on the record, and then Quincy also had me play all the rhythm parts and stuff. It was really a blast. It was all great players, and we were doing Yvonne Linds's tunes and other tunes, and it was really a wonderful project and a very successful album for George. George at the time lived in Hawaii, and so when his parts were done and his singing was done and most of the album was done except for the mixing, George went back to Hawaii, and so Quincy and his great engineer Bruce Sweetin were mixing the album. One night I get a call in the middle of the night. It was like, I don't know, 2 in the morning. I was sleeping, and he said, "Ritenour." I said, "Yeah." He said, "It's Q." He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm sleeping, Quincy." He says, "You got to come down here now. You got to help me out." And I said, "What's going on?" He said, "The second engineer accidentally erased part of George's solo, and George went back to Hawaii. We got to finish the album by tomorrow." And I said, "So what do you want me to do?" He says, "You got to punch in George's solo." I said,
"Wow."
I said, "Q, come on. You're pulling a fast one on me. You're joking, right?" He says, "No, we got to do this tonight, and George is not here, man. You got to do it." And I said, "We got a little cassette of the way the solo goes, and yeah, I can play it for you. It's just a few seconds. He didn't erase much, but it was an accident." I don't think that second engineer worked there after that. And so then I go down there. Fortunately, George's gear is still there that I had been kind of setting up and helping George get his sound. So we plug in and kind of match the sound, and then they play me what George played on the solo, and I got close to it and played something and finished it, and it sounded good. It worked, and it took, I don't know, an hour and a half or something, and so Quincy said to me, he said, "Hey, just for now," I said, "let's keep this between you and I." And I looked at Q. I said, "We ain't gonna tell George?" And he said, "Maybe later, but not now." So about 20 years go by. And I'm walking in with George in the airport. We're catching the same plane somewhere. I said, "Hey, George, I got a story to tell you." and I told him the story of Give Me the Night, and he laughed his ass off, and he said, "Well, the record was a hit, so I'm good."
Lee, what was it like playing with George? I mean, because here it is, you've already started your solo career, and you're assisting and playing in the company Quincy Jones and George Benson. Was it kind of like a father-son thing going?
Well, first of all, I was a huge George Benson fan. I am a huge George Benson fan, and we're very close, and I consider him just one of the icons of guitar, period. But plus, then he could sing, so he had just too much talent on his hands. But it was just such an honor to be around guys like that. But then as I grew up and got into my own thing, I think George appreciated what I did, and we became more on some kind of same level, because the things that I could do, he didn't necessarily do, and I certainly couldn't do the things that he could do. So it just, as you grow into your career, some people drift away from each other, and George just once in a while he calls me on the cell phone. I'm so tickled that he calls, and he's not doing as much these days, but I know,
He's cut down.
yeah. But I know we're working together with Marcus Miller in Las Vegas in November, and along with some other greats, and so we're going to have some fun.
That'll do it again for another edition of the Pace Report. Reporting live here at the Iridium here in New York City. I'd like to personally thank the incomparable Lee Ritenour for his time. Make sure you go out and support his Musician Creativity Lab, which is online at www.musicians.online/LP. For more information about Lee's upcoming tour dates or to order his music, visit him online at leeritenour.com. I'd like to personally thank the staff and management here at the Iridium for their warm hospitality. As always, please visit my website, www.thepacereport.com, for my weekly column as well as my past segments. As well as please go to my YouTube page and Vimeo page to subscribe, share, and like my videos and the content. Until next time, remember, if it's in the groove, it'll make you move. Till next time, peace.